Hi, everyone. Hi. Did everybody get space time that they needed? Water? Blood sugar? Okay, great. I'm Rachel Fell. As Chris said, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm really glad to be here. I've known Chris and connected with the SoulSpark Learning team for some time, and I'll tell you a little bit more about my journey that I've been on, sort of in parallel, quite parallel with Eric, actually. So when Chris put out, then the Dabrowski team put out the call for presentations, I knew I had to apply, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to talk about. So I submitted this sort of vaguely general title as a placeholder for what would emerge. Because I knew that it was going to take shape as I got closer to the date of the meeting you all here and being here. So what to expect? My story, quite similar in arc. I took myself out of the room after the last presentation and I worried a little bit. How can I tell the same story a second time differently? There is so much in Eric's story that is exactly my story, the same exact arc, except different. I'm not Eric. It depends on how you look at it. I'm not Eric. I haven't had Eric's experiences in his human form and his, but I sure recognize that story because I've lived that story. And I'm willing to bet a bunch of you in this room have also very much lived and are living variations on that story in yourself throughout a lifetime. You know, like Eric said, or the question about when does the thread end? Does the thread end? So I'm going to share about my story, and I'm going to share a little bit about my professional approach in working with neurocomplex and gifted adults in the positive disintegration space as well. So kind of a half and half deal. Learnings woven in, how I see the world. So I'm just going to start there. I'm going to start how I see the world. Neurodiversity invites such a beautiful space for us to explore. And I think sometimes we gloss over neurodiversity and we go right to neurodivergence. Neurodiversity introduces non-duality. Neurodiversity invites an exploration of the unseen. Neurodiversity states that we are all the same, we are all different, and we are all distinct simultaneously. So when I first started exploring this, I was like, whoa, non-duality. And then I started looking at it more closely and I was like, this is meta non-duality. This is self-referential non-duality. This is the zero, and this is the one. And the one, and the one, and the one, and the one, and the two, and the three. They're all ones. They're all ones all the way up the line. I always wanted this in math class, and I never got it. So I opted out of traditional educational settings pretty quickly, probably around third grade was when I got super disillusioned. But I'll tell you more about that in a moment. I'm going to shift gears here now and tell you a little bit about what I do for work, what I do professionally. So at this juncture, I would say that I am an existentially oriented and neurocomplex engineer. It's a word I sort of made up. Orienting ontology. What happens when you put orienting and ontology together? You get engineer. I walk with people in exploring their realities to the edges. And that is sacred work. And that is work that asks me to be very aware of the power over dynamics that live in myself. It asks me to be very aware of my influence. It asks me to be very slow, which does not come easily to me. In the last 4 years, I've got about 4,000 hours in practice doing this work, which is kind of a lot in 4 years. And I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to share those learnings in more formalized ways in the future. For now, they all live in a secret kind of place in my computer. Before my massive positive disintegration, rolling dark night of the soul situation, I was a brand and marketing director in tech. And I think I was always interested in meaning and identity. And it didn't quite jive with the way most marketers and brand directors did their work. Identity comes inside out. You can shape identity, but you don't copy what's out there. You live what's within. And for many years, I feel like I tried to get that through in the tech world, in the marketing world. That didn't quite go so well. So, nice little synchronicity here that everything melted. I lost my job and was forced into a new line of work, which was very, in hindsight, very great. My positioning, where do I sit in this known and unknown space, the space of the rational, the space of the unseen, the space of the subjective, the space of the objective, which for my money is consensus subjectivity, and we use methods to connect. We use methods to create understanding, to come to conclusions together, fully into that. And how do we go beyond what we know together? I would say that I'm inclusive of, but beyond convention. I'm very sensitive to power over dynamics inside of convention. As a result, I'm not somebody who's followed convention. I dropped out of college 3 times. I graduated in the top 10% of my class while having skipped 70% of my senior year. Yeah. So institutions and I don't have a good track record. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of amazing good work being done in spaces inside of convention. I'm really into the connection between somatic and representational ecologies. What does that mean? The body uses a language that is nonverbal to communicate with us. Learning to speak that language is the language of energy, and there are other ways to explore that as well, which we'll talk about a little bit. I'm oriented to self-inclusion, which means not bypassing the self and not bypassing subjectivity. Neurodiversity says that we are all the same, all different, all distinct, all unique. No 2 nervous systems process and synthesize information the same way. No 2 people come to the same conclusions. No 2 people experience the world exactly alike. Subjectivity is an expression of natural intelligence. So how do we hold subjectivity is a question I like to sit with a lot. How we hold our knowing or our unknowing. Intelligence is not a commodity. It's a process. Some of you may be familiar with the book Immense World by Ed Yong. Anybody in here read that book? Yes, beautiful. Okay. So that book is all about how animals perceive, how animals think. There's a German term called Umwelt. How does a bat experience and learn? How does a dolphin experience and learn? Joy? All right. How does a dolphin experience and learn? How do humans experience and learn? How do humans process information? Right now, I'm swimming in a sea of physics in my body, all around me. I extend beyond my body. I'm of and within, and I'm without. Where is this information coming from, and how am I coming to these words right now? That's a fascinating space. I'm swimming in waveforms. I have vision. My vision is looking out and seeing all of you. I rely on that pretty heavily, just like most humans do. But I also know that there's a lot more than what we see at present. So I'm waxing a little bit. I am going entirely feral with this presentation also, by the way. So I want you to keep your expectations low on organization. Yeah, low. Who do I work with? I work with neurocomplex and gifted adults who are exploring or in positive disintegration. I explore the meaning that lives beneath identity with them. Like I said before, that is a sacred space, and I hold that very in a deep reverence. Full body intelligence and all things existential. So those things usually kind of come together when I'm working with gifted and neurocomplex adults. I also work with humans and teams who want to explore meaning and identity. So this gets into your brand territory, your sort of business territory. We're transforming, we're evolving. Businesses are alive, organizations are alive, the world is alive. Why wouldn't your organization be alive? Why wouldn't it be evolving? Of course it's evolving all the time. Leaders who seek to understand their own behaviors, choice-making, and influence. The power over that lives within is a thing. So I won't read the slide. You can read the slide, it's fine, it's not important. Or it is important, you know what? It is important, I just don't need to read it. This is a photo from my friend who wanted me to put it in the presentation to remind myself to be myself. Actually, we're going here. This looks familiar, probably. A little familiar. I want to spend a little time, even though Eric's and my story is so very similar, honoring the unique human self that is Rachel, who really did go it alone for most of the first half of her life and is just now learning not to do that. On the left, there's little Rachel in kindergarten, identified gifted in kindergarten, hyperlexic, reading very early. In the middle, we have 17-year-old Rachel. The smile is, it's real, but it's forced. It strikes me that in all three of these pictures, the facial expressions really tell the story. And then on the right, we have 34-year-old Rachel, who has forged a sort of successful marketing career after coming out from deep, wild child burnout stuff. Real confused, real confused. I always loved learning. But school was a mixed bag from very early on. It was a respite from the lack of love or earnest and real connection at home. It was a place to explore, but very early on, the message was loud and clear that I couldn't be who I was and explore in the ways that I needed to. Identified gifted in kindergarten. First grade, kicked out of class for reading too fast aloud. I cried. It was all these mixed signals from teachers all the time. You have so much potential. This is amazing. You're doing great work. And not like that, not like that. Nope, don't be you. That's not okay. It's my story, but it's a story of so many people, so many people. The pattern continue in the complexity, the complication, the bifurcation between inner and outer. It's like as I went, I lost connection to my interiority entirely. When and where was the first crack? I think it was pre-verbal for me. I think it was, this gets into the ways that we uniquely make meaning of trauma, conditioning, time, space. But it's old, it's really old. So that progressive masking, that progressive fawning, that progressive use, its use is the word, use of my authentic self and my capacities, let's say, in ways that were accepted by others and by convention. It started so early. By the time I got to high school, I had no idea who I was. Middle school probably, high school for sure. I found myself in a sort of very liminal state of bouncing around a lot of different groups looking for belonging. I remember wanting desperately a mentor or a teacher or someone to be able to access that interiority that had been so pushed down, that had fallen through the cracks. I had no sense of self. And I'm gonna say that sense of self is different than self-concept. I had no sense of self. I had no sense of my body. I had no sense of being a human at all. And my self-concept could change at any time. I could manipulate it, I could shift it. I could make it what other people needed it to be. So, yeah, so that's the story, and it moves through, right? And again, it's my story, and it's a universal story too, I think, for so many people, maybe for all people. By the time I got to the end of high school, I was pretty into substance stuff, and by the time I got to college, it was pretty gnarly. It was really gnarly. I felt entirely alone, incredibly dark, deep aloneness. And by that time, like, there was no one who could hold me. There was no one who could help me. There was no one who could hear me. It was just trapped, all trapped. So when I think about when did disintegration start for me, it's hard to say. It feels like it was always there. Feels like it was always there. But it did get progressively worse. It got progressively worse. Who are we? Who are you? All humans are permeable, and some more than others. All humans experience their complexity, some more than others. And what we learn about safety and belonging and learning has a lot to do with who we are. What do I have to do in order to belong, to be safe? Is it safe for me to learn in ways that are uniquely mine? Am I safe in this room not having letters behind my name and doing the work that I do? Yes, I am. So early adulthood, really dark, lots of drinking, lots of drugs, lots of just like shove the trauma down, completely just like stuff it down. And then in about 2016, it did all fall apart. I don't know if this was a positive disintegration or a dark night of the soul or the beginning of individuation or if it was an existential crisis, but it was known to me. It became known to me in 2016 that this is not working. I had turned around the drinking and drug stuff and had sort of like this meteoric rise into marketing and brand. And then I got married and I bought a house and I completed the checklist. Yeah, no, that's when my body started screaming at me. Has anyone here, I mean, I'm assuming many of us here have our own experiences of positive disintegration. For those of you that do, I'm curious who had physical symptoms as a part of it. Yes. This is a space we can explore a lot more. I was so defended from myself. I only existed as a construct. My body was screaming at me to get my attention. So what did that look like? It looked like 20 visits to the ER in 2 years. It looked like every specialist under the sun, rheumatology, immunology, I'm probably saying that wrong, whatever, that one, neurology, keep going, right? I ended up getting a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. That's not the point. But my body had to get my attention. It had to get that bad, and it was really bad. So I was in an existential health crisis. That's what that was. I didn't exist. It was only a representation of me that existed. Those structures of identity, which were protective in nature, were crumbling and they were melting. I started questioning everything. I started questioning myself, and it was very messy. During that time, rediscovering my unseen difference. I had a boss use the word gifted with me, I think in about 2017. And it was like a gong went off through space-time. It was like somebody had seen part of me that was deep down in those cracks, the part of me that, I guess, I don't know, it was the wake-up call. So that identification was like this temporary relief. There was this temporary structuring, but then it was a way deeper disintegration after that, which I'll talk about in a moment, because assessment and diagnosis and the relationship between assessment and diagnosis and disintegration is an interesting one. I had 6 different people assess or reflect me, and I had 6 different assessments and reflections. Part of my protection was I've always had a very strong inner authority, very autodidact. You're not going to tell me. I think it was something that in hindsight came online to protect me so that I could get to this moment. I had to understand it for myself. I had to create and shape my unseen difference for myself. The reflections and the diagnosis were not enough. They were not clear. They were not me. They were reflections of me, just like my self-concept was of some sort of reflection of me. So a lot of this disintegration had to happen over time, and especially in this particular dimension, exploring one's relationship to unseen difference for rebuilding to occur. It's really weird because it's all kind of layered over itself. When I work with clients, a lot of times we'll go into creative exploration. And one of the things a lot of times people say, I feel like I'm in many worlds at once with positive disintegration. Am I composting the old? Am I building the new? Does the new get built? Does it grow from the ground up? How do we interact with what's emerging? This is the nonlinearity of the levels, I think. So there was a period here, and I'll talk about this in a bit, where there was a lot of rebuilding and rewinding and rewilding and a lot of learning, which, because I have a strong inner authority, that was great. I could just like run. My autodidact was free. She could just go explore the world to the edges and beyond. Asking yourself if you can trust yourself to know anything is a really, really scary place. Really scary place. I think an earthquake's a good analogy for positive disintegration. How deep underground is the epicenter? How long has the ground been shaking? How zoomed in or out am I on what I'm looking at? Do I exist? Does Rachel exist? If what fires together wires together, and most of my patterning had been protection, what's beneath all that protection? What's beneath all that masking and all of those adaptations that live in my body? So then it was like this. The earthquake from within and the earthquake from without at the same time. Again, I told you the story is very similar arc to Eric. I've mentioned inner authority a couple times. With some reflection, she was able to run and start playing with ontology, epistemology, all those fun words that we reserve for like, PhDs are all doctors of philosophy, but like, the philosophy ones. She had carte blanche to go. Finally, excellent. It was like that. It was like that on my living room floor, and it was physics, and it was physiology, and it was biology, and it was chemistry, and it was everything that little Rachel never actually got to do in institutionalized educational settings because she's a feral learner, she's transdisciplinary, she's very sensitive to the living nature of the world. And when you pin down answers to things, you are effectively commodifying them. So I'm real sensitive to that. With positive disintegration, I map it as a form of natural intelligence. All things, all the cells, all the molecules in us are constantly dancing in emotion. Nothing is ever tacked down. When I tack down a butterfly, I've killed it and it's dead. If I pull the branch off the tree and I pluck the leaves, I've killed it. So anyways, positive disintegration gave little Rachel and her inner authority permission to go wild, and I did. I went to the edges of everything, all that we know, and metaphysics is my jam, and it's very pragmatic to explore all sorts of different angles. The physiology of earthquakes. the physiology of a positive disintegration. I'm not interested so much in what it is as I'm interested in how it works. And that's transdisciplinary. Physiology is quite alive. So once I had some new maps that I had participated in creating, I could zoom back into the individual Rachel. At first, I couldn't touch my own pain. I could not touch it. I couldn't go anywhere near it. I needed new maps. I needed new structures, all in the meta, to help, I don't know, make me feel safe, give me a sense of where to go, where to put this stuff. Eventually, I could start zooming back in. And eventually, I came back to psychology, autopsych. You know, we talk about autopsychology and positive disintegration. I needed to go to like auto-ontology to come back to autopsychology. And then I could see every single self that I had ever been through time standing in the rubble. But I couldn't see that before I had maps that I had created. And once I had explored some of the selves, all the past selves in the rubble, and started to slowly feel her pain, then I could go deeper and deeper and deeper. These slides are kind of out of order. I told you it'd be a little feral. So not just auto psych, auto everything, all of it. The nature of reality had to be that way. And the funny thing started happening as this was happening. The complication turned into complexity, turned into coherence. So we talk a lot about complexity, and a client said this to me a couple months ago, and it landed so beautifully. Complication is disorganized complexity. My energy began to return. My sense of my body began to return. I could feel my energy in motion again. I have to give a huge shout out to one of my teachers and mentors and now colleagues who helped me understand that safety is not psychological, it is physiological. The brain is taxonomically part of the nervous system, and the primacy of the sub and unconscious, that does all the work so that I can talk right now. I'm not making my heart beat consciously while I'm having to talk to you about this stuff. My body is an exquisite vessel full of unknown that I'm not accessing right now. I'm not commanding and controlling my digestion right now. Maybe a little bit, but it's a whole other conversation. So as I allowed myself to reclaim learning, I reclaimed belonging and I reclaimed safety within myself. And it started to change things, and that's a blank side. Oh, that side's supposed to say shadow. Well, this works too. Touching in and learning to communicate with the unknown and unseen self is, it's tender and important work, and how we do it really matters. If I take a high beam flashlight looking for a single answer down into the dark, that's not going to work so well. I need to take a lantern. I need to be curious. I need to be open to what I find, and I need to be honest about what I can handle. If something emerges from the dark that I've never seen before, how am I going to interact with that? This isn't a presentation about shadow, but I have a lot to say about the shadow. The shadow is a place. It is not implicitly bad. It is full of unknown, unseen, mysterious, amazing stuff. And it lives in all of us. And we can find really and encounter really amazing things that emerge from our shadow selves. Because I have such a deep respect for each person's unique way of learning, most of the models that I use are meta models, meaning that they're not specific. They're very, very zoomed out. And even then, it's like, take or leave this. This is going to help, maybe, maybe not. This is an example of a meta model I created during my process. So I channeled some of my emerging creative energy into mapping. Mapping is a big theme. But this is a way to see the unseen self. I'm certainly not the first person who's ever created models like this, and I certainly won't be the last. But how do we see in our interiority? when I ask clients this question, they almost never, ever, ever mention the literal physicality of their tissues. They talk about their soul, they talk about their ego, they talk about models that psychology has given them, oftentimes. But they almost never, ever, ever talk about their actual bodies, which is a really, really interesting space also to explore, because if we are an expression of natural intelligence, again, how do we move information through our body minds? How do we come to conclusions? That's not some sort of abstract representation. That is happening in your body. So how do we move towards known and unknowing coexisting? Towards the end of Eric's presentation, he said something about, well, actually, I don't know if you said it that way. World bridging? I forget how you said it. Something like that. How do we learn to see in the dark together? How do we learn to co-create a future that isn't predicated exclusively on knowing? That's the space I occupy, is the space where the known and the unknown coexist. Oil, water, oil, vinegar, delicious balsamic once emulsified. Delicious balsamic. They don't mix easily, and they create something new together. I feel like this is really important for us as a planet, as a species, as a planet, for consciousness, to be able to hold known and unknown together and to move towards, not away from. So what happened? Existential health crisis, yes. Physical health crisis, yes. Psychological health crisis, yes. Authenticity had been pushed down, trauma, conditioning. Human beings are permeable. Some are more permeable than others. There is good evidence to suggest that neurodivergent folks, some neurodivergent folks may be more permeable than others. We know about connective tissue stuff. There's a lot that we're learning right now. We know that some folks experience their own energy different than others. Intelligence as a process, not as a product. What does this exquisite, different, same meat suit that we all have in common? We're all different expressions of the same sacred vessel, just like all bats or all dandelions or all dolphins or all exquisite, individual, distinct beings, the same, different, unique. Okay, that's what happened. Basically, it was like coming back out of duality. It was coming back into authenticity. It was coming back home to my body, coming back home to honoring my distinction, which is what I'm doing right now. When I signed up for this, I didn't know why I signed up for it. It's to be seen in my distinction, which is really terrifying and kind of horrible, but also kind of fun, I guess. Yeah. So anyways, I'm slowly coming out of a lifetime of protection and hiding. Somebody who cares deeply, somebody who feels intensely. I'm somebody who's learning a lot. I'm somebody who has a lot to share and a lot to offer, a lot to offer. So what I'm offering right now, a number of things, but in the realm of positive disintegration, existential health, and neurocomplex and gifted adults. When I start working with people and they're moving through a positive disintegration, one of the first things I always say is, it's natural in nature for things to fall apart, to come back together. You are no different. And then I wait, and then I see what that evokes for them, and we talk about it. Pretty Socratic. The basis of, if the basis of all reality is that aliveness and that movement and that growth, why wouldn't that include us? Can we give ourselves permission to be part of nature instead of exceptional and away from and different and distinct in a way that's maybe not so healthy? Can we see ourselves as a beautiful expression of natural intelligence? Reality includes all that we do not see and do not know. Visible light spectrum. We rely very heavily on sight, and there's a lot that I cannot see right now. How do we relate with the unknown in ourselves? For a lot of people, that's a very scary place. Would it be scary if we weren't conditioned to know everything? To hold up our intelligence as a commodity, to hold up our knowing as a currency? There is a space where we make meaning, and it moves from the unknown to the known, and that's happening in our body minds in my book. The entirety of our human intelligence is predicated upon the past and how I've made meaning since the very beginning. What fires together wires together. Birth to 3, birth to 7, and birth to 17 are formative times for the development of the nervous system, the sub and unconscious. What did I learn about safety, belonging, and learning? What if disintegration is a sort of forced unlearning? Something my body knows. It's like, you're gonna have to rewire this. This is not it. Mine being so physically expressed, that's the meaning I make of it now. My body was trying to get my attention. My sub and unconscious was trying to get my attention. The vagus nerve runs 20% of its information down and 80 up. That's right, Autumn? Yeah, okay. So for a while there, I got really into emergence and just like listening, just lots of listening. And like, I'll be guided by what emerges. And that took me into some really cool places. And then I remembered that claw machine, that's that 20 down, that we're conditioned with that claw that's gone manic and, it's out of whack. That claw is actually a part of my natural intelligence. That's part of human physiology. Top-down processing is also part of the human experience. And then there's this observer, there's this metacognition, there's this meta-awareness, there's like this other aspect that I can watch and like, what's that about? Do we get to participate in our own rebirth? Do we get to co-create ourselves back up from the ground? Can we grow, see the light of day? And do we participate in that? And in my book, the answer is yes, we do participate in it. This is in context. So we're all this butterfly, we're all this larva, this is the lifetime of the circle, and this is our context. This is our context right now. Who do you want to be beneath your protection? Where are you called? Where is your thread? Are you grabbing onto it? If it's not a thread, maybe it's something else. Having a personal relationship with meaning, I believe, is necessary for a co-creative paradigm. When I started spinning out, I was spinning out about language. 2 people use a word. I don't know, chair. Everybody thinks of a chair in this room. Chances are most of us will think of a chair with 4 legs. But if you grew up in a home with your parents were hippies and they only had beanbags, you're not gonna think of legs, you're gonna think of a beanbag. That's a pretty material example. So what happens when I get to love or integrity or authenticity? What meaning lives in your body around those words? What have you learned about integrity and authenticity? Have you participated in your own meaning making of those very representational, abstract words, which actually do have meaning, which live in our bodies? I think this is a really potent space and a huge opportunity for humans to go inward, to value the subjectivity. Neurodiversity says that we are all unique and subjective. There is a primacy of the subjective that matters. So where do we place that? Or maybe even before that, how do we see that in ourselves? Is it okay to have a unique subjective experience? There's a lot of places and spaces in the world that say no. When I have a relationship with meaning in my own body, in my own personal ontology, I can meet others in their difference and distinction and not need to force my meaning upon them. I'm human, so I'm not going to have a perfect state of safety all the time. My nervous system is going to move from protection and vigilance to ventral vagal, and it's going to pendulate, and it's going to move, it's going to evolve. But can I engage those well-worn patterns of safety, belonging, and learning within myself? I think that's what Dabrowski would probably call autopsych, or that's like a way, I don't want to speak for Dabrowski, but that's one definition that autopsych might have for me in my body. I've kind of already gone to this body-mind split thing a little bit. I'm just going to come back to this for a moment. So neurodiversity is a way of seeing what it is to be human together. No two definitions of neurodiversity are the same. There are innumerable definitions out there. And most of them invoke the brain exclusively. They are scientifically, taxonomically incorrect. The brain is part of the nervous system, not the other way around. I mentioned permeability earlier. There's so much we don't know about neurosomatic diversity. What about the goop that lives between our cells? How is that the same and different? What about our cells themselves? There's a lot of beautiful opportunities for exploration in here that could zoom in. Neurocomplexity. I could not explore my neurodivergence through the lens of the labels and the language exclusively. They helped, but they did not necessarily give me the livingness, the aliveness that I needed to be able to understand myself and to come back to myself. So one of my collaborators and I right now, we're working on creating a shape, a definition of neurocomplexity that we hope will invite many, many, many people to this party of living unseen difference, living distinction, living difference, living sameness. I see neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and neurocomplexity all working together in a beautiful triangle that gives people ways to explore themselves. Shout out to Katie's graphic, which I use in my work oftentimes. I love that this takes us into the qualitative. It gives people something to grab onto to explore their unseen difference. It gives them suggestions, it gives them starting points, it gives them reflections that they see themselves in potentially. What happens when I explore early emotional awareness through the lens of what emotions actually mean to me? You could say that I'm alexithemic. I may be. You could say that I am more in touch with the energy and motion in my body than I am with the words and their expressions. Sadness. What does it mean to be sad? I don't know. Let me check my body. Are we doing okay for time? Yeah? Okay, cool. A few words on positive disintegration and assessment. In my experience, which is just mine and not, other people's, but in the last 4 years, I have noticed a trend that when people are assessed or diagnosed, it seems to spur the positive disintegration. It seems to, if it's already in progress, put a little jet fuel on the fire, or it can provoke a positive disintegration. When we're working with identity, we're working with something existential. We're working with ourselves. We're working with the nature of the self. That gets right into neuroception pretty quickly. Neuroception is the body's sense of safety. And so when you start questioning who you are, you start destabilizing your whole world. And that is something to be very respectful and very considerate around, in my book. So, leading the way on alongside, orienting folks in this space. One of my clients once used this, and I thought it was beautiful. I'm lost in the sauce. No structure, lost in the void, lost in the unknown, lost in the meltiness. Things fall apart to come back together everywhere in nature, including you. How do you see your own nature? I work best with gifted and especially high plus gifted neurocomplex individuals, people who are very existentially oriented, who like to go to the edges of ontology as their way of being. So that said, my work is not for everyone. What is the nature of a self is a really interesting question to orbit. Really interesting question. I'm going to let this slide speak for itself. Oftentimes, this is one of the first places we explore. What is the nature of your inner world? What is it to have a self, to be a self? Do you see yourself as a brain floating out in space somewhere and like your inner world is somehow, and that's okay if you do. How do you see it? Where are you now? Where are you now is a very interesting question. Empathy and lived experience, reflecting back that you too have been lost in the sauce is very important. It can get really dark and dire in there, and people can feel very alone. Depending upon the training, depending upon the approach, sometimes we're taught kind of not to be personal, not to connect in these ways. But if safety and belonging are inextricable, you belong to a club of people who have experienced this phenomenon. You are not alone. That can be very stabilizing. It can be very healing unto itself. Progressive locating and framing. Where are you now? I'm in my body. I'm in my eyes. I'm watching all of you. I'm watching myself scan for approval and disapproval. Are they getting it? Do I sound crazy? Am I making sense? Where am I now? Now I'm coming back here. Framing. If you're lost in the sauce, you have no structure. If you have no structure, you have no form. I am form. This is confusing. I have form and there is no form. What is happening? Encouraging folks to frame up and structure their inner worlds in ways that make sense to them. I offer this kind of stuff, but it's not my subjective reality. I have influence in a position of orienting, guiding, walking with, but their framing, their meaning making is of the utmost importance. Their restructuring is what matters. Oftentimes, I'll just guide them to that location or the structure. It's as simple as a question, where are you now? If that question is destabilizing, then we slow down and we go to where we need to go from there. Continuous acknowledgement of inner authority, sacred PDA. It is their reality to engage and explore. So I go slow and I'm always continuously checking in consent-wise. Is it okay if we explore here? Can we go here? Does this feel all right for you? Is this too much? Participatory action research. Some of you probably know about this. Becoming your own student of self, your own scientist of self. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of burn through this now. Working with physiologic safety, which is psychologic safety. Nervous system stuff is complex. We as practitioners, I think, have a responsibility to have a lived experience with our own nervous systems. It's not, we have beautiful graphics. This one in particular is one of my favorites, that we can learn a lot from. But if we're not learning in our own experience, that's not enough. We have to learn in our own experience. The graphics not enough. Again, shout out to Autumn. When I think it was a couple years ago when we started exploring this, and I could self-locate, but I couldn't self-locate. Yeah, that. Yeah. Dancing with titration, co-created consent, right? So Ida Rolf once said, you can't go too deep, you can only go too fast. As somebody who goes fast, that is a big challenge for me, and that is a learning, and it's ongoing learning. Can I learn while being in practice? Can anybody learn while being in practice? What happens when you graduate and you go out in the world? Do you stop learning? I hope not. The spirit of exploration and play. So this is an interesting one because depending upon where the person is, play might not be accessible at all. It might be very deep. It might be very dark. Their nervous system may be very unable to access any sort of levity, any sort of play. Titrated play. Titrated exploration. I don't need to say that again. Oh, the energy and motion thing, right? So when I work with folks, I work top down, exploring meaning slowly through language. I work bottom up, which is exploring nonverbal intelligence and energy and motion in the body. And I work lateral in kind of untangling metacognition from meaning making. Helping the observer once again settle into its role as a neutral observer who can help us move away from self-judgment. A lot of time people's inner observer is their inner critic. Yeah, and just a word to honor the courage and tension of you all who are working with new theories, new ways of practicing in modern times that maybe aren't necessarily so open to a more syncretic approach. It can be very scary to be out here doing it differently. But don't take my word for it. It's my guy, LeVar. I think Reading Rainbow is really, really inner authority friendly. And they highlight subjective interpretations of literature, which I remember being in college and having a professor tell me that I was interpreting incorrectly. Literary criticism. Yeah, great. So I love holding up Reading Rainbow as an example. And these are just some nice things people have said. And I don't know how much time we have, but I'm happy to take a question or two.
Thank you, Rachel. We have about 7 minutes for questions, and I have 2 on Slido. So I'll start with the first from Anonymous. How did you practically reclaim safety within your body?
Ooh, yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for people with trauma to feel safe in their body again?
Top down, bottom up, observer. For me, the way I make meaning of it is that the bottom up and the language that doesn't use words, energy and motion, I need to learn to witness and pay attention to that and not force and not rush. So I wasn't in my body for a long time, and it took a long time for my neural mind and matter connection to come back online. Once I did, I started observing my state. State being nonverbal, state being like that energy and motion. And turns out, yeah, there was a lot of fear all the time. There still is. I'm not physiologically safe right now. I'm not. So it's slow. It's really, really slow. And it comes from learning to listen to the language of the body, which a lot of times we jump to words. There are ways we can do this. Creative interoception, expressing energy and motion through color. This feels effervescent. My throat feels like the night sky, these sorts of things. So yeah, creative interoception and just learning to listen to your body, I suppose. I hope that's enough.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
From Anonymous, would you recommend gifted assessment given your experience?
Location is important. I think self-location is important. oh, this is gross to say, I'm gonna say it anyway. Every one of my assessments has been exceptionally profoundly and always on the profoundly side of things, and the word profound really fucked me up. Sorry to swear again, but Eric normalized it, so I'm doing it. Thanks, Eric. I think that assessment and reflection can be helpful, and I almost wonder about its necessity on the journey of positive disintegration. How we do that needs to be held with great care, whether that's adults or children. Being labeled gifted, identified as gifted in the way I was when I was a kid. Andrew Bird, if anybody's familiar, he has this beautiful song, Measuring Cups. Stand at the front of the class and we'll measure your brain, we'll do something, we'll give it a name, we'll give you a complex, and you'll have some shame. So how we hold it with care is my response.
Thank you. I am out of questions. Currently, we maybe have time for one more, but I'll read two more nice things people have said. From the chat, Lucas, loving every single word. And from Rainier, same here, great frequency to take in. So
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
that,
very
too.
much. That means a lot to receive.
we'll do a nice little wait time to see if one more question pops.
I'll stand here for 3 minutes.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for your presentation. There's so much that stuck out for me. I felt like I was feverishly writing notes of
sorry.
like all the things that were hitting for me. But I think the one question that is percolating for me is when you talked about, you asked the question, what are the false structures of identity? And I kind of broke my brain, and I was curious if you had any insight as to how do we go about identifying the falseness?
That's a really good question. Sometimes I try to pack too much in and then I don't use language with enough care. I'm learning to go slow. For me, it was that my identity was unconsciously held as a commodity. And it was purely for the external world. Like, there was no subjective relationship with either a sense of self or a self-concept that was like sacred and just for me. Like everything was for the outside world for some utilitarian end. So that feels like a part of it. And then another part of it, like protection is sacred. And so like, is my protective self my false self? No, but most of my identity was patterned around protection. So trauma, conditioning, permeability, there was a lot of conditioning that mapped as traumatic in my body-mind because trauma isn't what it was, it's the impact on the body-mind of the individual, the distinct individual. It felt unauthentic to be living from protection. So not that that's a false self per se, but that like most of my identity was patterned around protection. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for sharing your story and expertise. We were so glad to hear what you had to say.
Thanks.
Round of
Joy.
applause.
Thank you all.